So, it looks as though, very unsurprisingly, Winston Churchill has not risen from the grave to debate us today. So, Winston Churchill probably would have been a free speech warrior. I would have thought he would definitely be calling out the so-called woke mob and whatnot every time that he was criticized. So, I'm sorry that he couldn't join us. But we have a wonderful program planned in spite. So, appropriately titled Churchill Chickens Out. So not only did he not debate us, we're also going to be speaking with our special guest, who we'll introduce in a minute, to discuss Churchill College as well. But let's start with our regular, I don't know, are we a gang? Free speech gang? We can start with the Woke Sorcerer. Hello. How are you?
Hello. Frankly disgusted that Winston Churchill has refused to rise from the dead because he is basically deplatforming and cancelling me by remaining dead. Very upset. Apart from that, I'm all right.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into maybe a bit of the football in a minute as well. So it's sometimes, in certain ways, it doesn't bear thinking about. But I'm going to bring on Some Guy as well. How are you, Some Guy?
I'm doing pretty good. Once again, I've been accidentally platformed, and I can't believe that the bobbing head bulldog from Churchill Insurance has refused to debate us.
Indeed, the bobbing head. And we've also got Carl mentioned that he might join us in a little while. But if I could introduce our very special guest for the program today, we're very thrilled to have Priyamvada Gopal, Professor of English. Hello, Priya.
Hi, Eric. Some guy, Woke Sorcerer, all of you.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm sorry I don't have headphones. I've just moved to a new place, and I can't find anything.
That's fine. I've got mine hanging on the wall. I've put some tennis racket tape on top to fix it as well.
Can you see me all right? All right. My laptop died this morning, so I'm using my...
No, it's perfect. That's great. It's wonderful. And if you don't mind, we'd love to speak about Churchill College. That was a featured item of news last week, and so we'd love to hear more about that. But if you wouldn't mind joining us for a rundown of culture war news, which, unsurprisingly, 2 weeks we have far too many instances of absurd claims of cancel culture and so forth. So if you don't mind, we can jump in and see what's first is England goes woke. So this refers to the football, and essentially the way in which there was a kind of accusation running around in the lead up to the football. I'm sorry to everyone who was waiting it out with the penalties and so forth last night, but and there's also quite a lot to discuss about what's going on today, which we might get into. But the original idea was to discuss the way in which there's this kind of idea that you shouldn't politicize football, and that we're too woke and so forth in football. And let's see what we have here. There's a few things going on. I'll see if I can pull this up. I think we lost both Priya and the Woke Sorcerer for a minute, but one of the things that came up was I don't know if did you all encounter this this comment from Claire Fox? What a vile, mean-spirited, divisive comment, which was related to the comments made by folks such as, let's see if I can pull this up. We've got Lawrence Fox. He had said, he was booing or he was against the English team when they were woke, but now he's not against them anymore. So did anyone come across this or find this unusual that there was this kind of flip-flopping of should they support England, should they not, last week. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's... I've got a really big delay on my voice, sorry.
No, that's...
It's really confusing. So Lee Anderson MP is still boycotting the football, or was.
Right.
Whereas Fox obviously wanted to support the team. Now they're doing well. And so it's kind of backtracked, right?
It's difficult to keep track of whether we're supposed to support the team or not support the team, whether they're taking the knee, whether the fans are supposed to boo or not boo. And then Gareth Southgate wrote a nice letter at some point that people thought was a woke conspiracy. Did anyone come across that? That because it was well written, that proved that it was woke. I wasn't exactly sure how that worked, but there's something today that I'll just bring up briefly, which was Nick Timothy. I'm sure everyone's thrilled to see this. So Nick Timothy saying it's absurd to project personal political ideals onto the England team. And he's mentioned that the most pompous of tweeters have pondered the political significance of the English team, by which I assume he doesn't mean himself. So I suppose this is really the topic of how the Conservative Party is clearly using the English team for their aims, and yet the English team, and this ultimately gets down to questions of St. George's flag and so forth, and what England sort of means, and is this undergoing a kind of re-signification? Is it just football? I don't know. What do others think? Oh, let me unmute you, Leon.
I mean, it's just it's using football, right?
Yeah.
I think Eric, you might you're on mute. Because of the echo, yes.
Okay. Got me now?
Sorry, Eric, you're mute.
Oh, I think I'm fine. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Oh, technical issues today. Let's just shift on towards two new things in our news rundown. We'll run through the first one quickly. First is drawing on Claire Fox's comments regarding the vile, mean-spirited comment that you're not allowed to challenge the people who booed the players. She also organized something called the Battle for Ideas, which is coming up soon. So that's let's see if we can pull this up. So we've got the open for debate, and I was just curious as to what others thought about this. The folks involved in this program. So Beyond Culture Wars. Who do we have here speaking? We've got Claire Fox herself, Arif Ahmed, Sharar Ali, and so on. This is about university diversity, culture of diversity. This is a great one, that what the Sewell Report means for education. This is the bit that was quite interesting. So it's it appears to acknowledge the validity of calls of Black Lives Matters for decolonized curriculum, suggesting that the Sewell Report is in line with that thinking, but then suggesting that the teachers' unions and academics like Kalwant Bhopal said the report was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how racism works. Defenders of the report, however, have argued that critics have not engaged with its content and that it provides a much-needed positive alternative to the dominant victim-oriented accounts of race relations. What do we think about this victim-oriented account? Because we've discussed the Sewell report in the past. What are your views on that, Priya?
It's really interesting. I think that they take this line. There's a terrible echo on my end.
Yes.
But anyway, carry on.
Sorry.
That they talk about apologies, but they're not actually interested in agency. So they're not interested in black and agency. Really in racism or resisting the empire. They're not interested in that, and so there's a contradiction that they claim that they want people to be agents, but they can only be agents in a very narrowly defined way. So if you want to decolonize, you want to question racism, if you want racism, if you take the knee, you're not being an agent because they don't consider any of that to be action.
Yeah, and it sort of seems like there's this idea that everyone has this victim-oriented account, and yet there's another point at which they talk about how the critics are not engaging with, the proud history of England and so forth. But actually, I think folks who are decolonizing the curriculum and so forth are very much engaged with the prior historiography and are adding to it, and yet these folks are not really engaging at all with contemporary scholarship in this area.
Well, exactly. I mean, what they're interested in is slaughter into mythologies. They're not an agency. They're not in voice. They're not interested in action. The Sewell report essentially calls for people to not challenge existing narratives, existing mythologies, and to not show any agency, to simply accede to whatever the dominant mental narrative and not challenge it. So the whole call not to be a victim is incredibly bad faith, because Black Asian history in this country is history of victimhood. It's very much the history of taking action and bringing change to this country. This country owes its minority and residents a great deal, and nothing to do with victimhood whatsoever.
Yeah, and actually, in another bit of this this battle of ideas, I mean, this is really getting us onto the next point. Is we have where is he? Eric Kaufman has made another appearance. He's he's becoming a bit like Where's Wally now. He's sort of turning up in every instance, I feel like. But this is on free speech and how we can combat cancel culture. And there's Mr. Kaufman, and this is getting us onto his latest run of, because we've discussed in the past his interest in people eating lunch, right? So there's folks eating lunch with Eric Kaufman and sort of the requirement to do that. But then he's now upped the ante to a certain extent. We've got from the National Review that there's a predilection among many young elite Americans. So this is based off of a survey that found that only 6% of female Ivy League students said that they would date a Trump supporter, and that this is now proving to be kind of an indication of progressive authoritarianism there. I'm
not sure about anyone else, but I think that expecting that people should sleep with the people that Eric Kaufman wants him to sleep with is kind of authoritarian, right? I mean,
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. I've just got to run.
Oh, I think maybe Eric's got childcare issues. Anyway, I'm not sure what you guys think about Eric Kaufman, other than obviously he's fairly disgusting.
I mean, this is kind of escalated a little bit, I think, because Eric Kaufman's whole big deal when he came onto the show last time was that he was unhappy or seemed unhappy that a bunch of his colleagues wouldn't have lunch with him because of his repugnant political views. And now it turns out that he's unhappy that people are not having sex with him because of his repugnant political views. So not only is lunch with Eric Kaufman mandatory, it seems like sex with Eric Kaufman is also now mandatory in Eric Kaufman's world.
I would have to eat lunch first.
It would have to be a really, really good lunch, and even then, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, because I mean, he keeps talking about dating people, and I really feel like there's got to be some kind of Freudian analysis or something that we could do to figure out what is motivating this anti-woke, because it seems like it's really increasingly focused on, there's various people who won't date me. We're sort of really mainstreaming the kind of incel early origins of the alt-right, are kind of moving towards the center of this kind of, especially women have to now date right-wingers, otherwise
it is consistent with his idea that political beliefs should also be like a protected characteristic, like race or gender, etc. So if it is not progressive for people to say that they won't date black people, then in Eric Kaufman logic, surely it would not be progressive if people say that they won't date Trump supporters or Boris Johnson supporters. So I mean, that's the kind of logic that's going on. And whether he's doing this deliberately to sort of deconstruct everything, like some kind of performance, or if he's genuinely that stupid, that's kind of up to people to decide, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, as this fellow Ari Cohn found, this is weird. It's weird that they're doing this. The last thing I think I'll only briefly mention that was in the news, free speech wise, was this Spa Hoax that came up. I don't know if everyone's confronted this, but this is the way in which there was this protest at there was a protest at this LGBT spa that was apparently a fake protest, or it was a fake video that led to a protest where two people were stabbed, both of whom were anti-trans protesters stabbed themselves or something along these lines. I don't mean to laugh at them stabbing themselves, but the whole thing was very bizarre. And the reason that it was interest to us at Free Speech Live was the overlap with Andy Ngo and this kind of like anti-fascism or anti-fascism, so anti-Antifa sort of. Andy Ngo was really starting this kind of idea of this violence coming from this anti-trans protest. And I suppose this is kind of just something we can maybe discuss together before moving on to last week's news about Churchill and so on. But
so one of the most bizarre things that came after this was Alison Bailey, I think her name is. She's the leader of LGB Alliance, who are very much an anti-trans organisation over here, tweeted that someone had thrown a Whisper chocolate bar into her garden, like We Spa, right, to poison her dogs because they must have been trans activists. Yeah. And then she found out that some kid had just thrown a Whisper bar into her garden, having no idea who she was. I don't know if you saw that, but it was absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, it was sort of like that the hatred, and there's a lot of instances of someone gets sort of have water thrown on them somehow, and that's considered. So that is something that is shared with Andy No. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Andy No, but he was the one who had the milkshake in his eye, and sort of acted like he'd been come back from a war zone or something, and it was perhaps a bit nasty, but it wasn't. I think he went on the every Fox News about how he'd been violently assaulted and so forth, and I don't know. It just seems like all of these tactics are starting to overlap a bit, and I suppose that's ultimately what we're interested in is this kind of how are these different free speech, anti-woke kind of initiatives coming together, because they seem to be ascending in a certain way. What's your view on this, Priya?
Well, it's interesting what you just said about saying my dogs are being poisoned, I'm being drowned in milkshake. The position of victim is actually one that the authoritarian right routinely adopts. So pretty much everything, or no one will date me, no one will have lunch with me. So if you want to talk about grievance, the retrograde is producing grievance culture all the time. So the list of actions, a chocolate bar in your garden, and the fact that just simply the fact that people might have lunch with you, this is then cause for deep crisis. So it is very ironic that they accuse anti-fascist victim culture, because actually false narratives of victimhood and victim culture are being produced precisely the white retrograde and their allies.
And I think that goes back to the original point I brought up with Claire Fox, talking about how divisive it was to essentially say, hey guys, maybe you shouldn't have booed the English team, as opposed to the people booing not being divisive. And that's coming up throughout today's commentary from the right. It's sort of saying, I did pull up Nick Timothy's comments, but at some point he was talking about how folks that the people suggesting that you can't, it's sort of, people are criticizing what is today some very obvious racist commentary about the penalties yesterday. There's also lots of footage of English fans running around causing havoc and mayhem, and people saying that those two things are horrible. And then he's kind of saying that people saying that is horrible are trying to politicize England football. And that seems to be this kind of, and every one of these has, I suppose also thinking about what links these, there's this kind of rhetorical strategies of, one of them is this victimization, but so claiming everyone is doing this victim culture while also saying I'm a victim of victim culture, or similarly cancel culture, while trying to cancel critical race theory from curriculum. It's sort of, it seems really obviously doublespeak in a kind of Orwellian way, but I don't know do we think that these are, how well thought through are these strategies, or are these just kind of not well thought through? Some guy, what do you think?
Well, I think, I think it's quite obvious that there is a playbook, and that, there are sort of like a set of rhetorical strategies, as you were saying, about, claiming that they're being cancelled or actively cancelling other people, claiming other people are being victims when they're actually using this victim discourse. or claiming that other people are politicizing an issue when they are the ones who are hyper-politicizing something. So there's a rhetorical strategy there, and I don't think it's necessarily that surprising, because I think the networks that are responsible for all four of the stories that you were just talking about are pretty much identical, or at least have significant overlaps, right? So obviously the Sewell report has had input from the so-called Spiked Online RCP crowd, right? And then the people who are pumping out this dreadful discourse about Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, and Buyaka Saka. Again, Claire Fox, RCP, Spiked Online people. And then, of course, the same group have connections with far-right groups which are pushing, transphobia and sort of quote-unquote gender-critical feminism. And so, these are, it is a sort of transnational, global kind of network of personalities who connected, via funding or via social media, via sharing the same platforms, appearing in the same shows, same TV channels all the time. And they are very clearly following some kind of strategy or some kind of manual on how to push particular buttons on particular issues, occupy particular positions on particular issues. And everything looks so sort of choreographed and coordinated. Like, there were people on social media last night saying, like, the moment that Buyaka Saka missed the penalty, they kind of could predict how the discourse was going to unfold in the next 24 hours. And, so far they're right? In that the discourse about football and race has sort of unfolded the way that it has in, Nick Timothy's column and all of these other awful people's editorials today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's I guess the what we could start to think about is maybe what to do about this, and maybe Priya has some insights as well. But maybe before getting into that, we can ask Priya about the situation, because going into this issue of this people saying they're against cancel culture actually oftentimes being the ones who seem to be most active about canceling. And so, for example, Churchill's an interesting case because you have Lawrence Fox using him and his statues as kind of this icon of free speech, and yet it seems like Churchill should theoretically, like Winston Churchill, should theoretically be capable of standing up to any criticism. He's supposed to be like the most powerful man of all time or something. There's this kind of legendary stature he has, and yet it seems like there's a kind of unwillingness to actually interrogate his actual legacy, his actual history. But maybe Priya could tell us more about what's been going on at Cambridge and Churchill College.
Yeah, to put it in a nutshell, we had a group that was started with holding events, just conversations to think a little bit more critically about Winston Churchill's life, legacy, and the winning of Winston Churchill in British society. Nothing terribly radical. The only thing is that the site where these discussions were supposed to happen, Churchill College, which is the national memorial of Churchill. And actually, the first events passed off without much comment. But the second event, by the time the second event took place, the tabloids got wind of it. And the first thing, of course, that really upset them was that all speakers, I was chairing the event, and there were three speakers, Madhushri Mukherjee, Kehinde Andrews, and Onyeka Nubia, that there were no white speakers. The previous event did have a critical but white speaker. So they decided ahead of the event that this was going to trash Winston Churchill. And then they decided to follow the event. And sure enough, the event happened. Nothing terribly unusual or extreme was said. In fact, I think all the way through, people said things which are documented and known about Churchill, about the British Empire, about what Empire entailed. But of course, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, and other tabloids were waiting to cover the event, having already predicted that it would trash Winston Churchill. And then of course, the very next day, there were hysterical headlines in several of these media organs. But the important thing, and that of course is predictable, but the more, I suppose, dangerous thing that is that the so-called independent think tank Policy Exchange, which is essentially a Tory think tank set up by Michael Gove, a think tank which is very close to government, and which has an outsized say, I think, in educational affairs, authored a report by the right-wing, very right-wing historian Andrew Roberts, which attacked the event, and particularly, much like the Sewell report, just kind of produced a series of cliches and took issue with, on the one hand, a couple of kind of minor errors, and on the other hand, with the fact that one of the speakers had talked about Nazism and the British Empire in the same breath, and had actually, it was his opinion that the British Empire was in many ways worse than the Nazis. Now, you can debate that, but it was not a particularly new point. It's a point that has been made in scholarship. It's a point that's been made by anti-colonial historians. But they seized on that point and essentially, to put it in technical terms, went nuts. It is to be remembered by the Andrew Roberts has in his lifetime spoken on platforms hosted by pro-apartheid organizations. He has subsequently claimed he didn't know that they were the pro-apartheid. But essentially, this is the kind of person who authors a report. He has always attacked any critical takes on the British Empire. So that's phase one of the story. Phase two is that the college got spooked, both by Policy Exchange's report, which it failed to challenge. It failed to challenge racist abuse thrown at the speakers, including me. It failed to challenge abusive fake narratives in the tabloid press. And then finally, it ended up disbanding the working group and essentially bringing the series to a halt. I should say here that people in the college have claimed that the Churchill family also gotten involved and said they will resign from the board of trustees and they will take donors with them. So all of this basically contributed to the Churchill working group being disbanded and the speaker series being essentially brought to a halt. So that's my story of cancer for you.
I mean, because it sounds to me like that is as close as I've ever heard to just a flat-out cancellation from donors, from the media, from a public campaign to say, here's an academic discussion that we don't like, and we're going to try and stop you from having it. And without actually participating in it, so it goes to this fact of everything that these folks say that they're against in some abstract moral general, like they claim it's not about conservative versus left, it's just the principle of free speech and cancel culture. I mean, I don't think I've come across any example that's more clear than the one you just mentioned, at least in Britain.
I mean, it's pretty textbook stuff. The real thing is that having said anything goes, anything should be uttered on campus, however controversial. The policy exchange report and the tabloid have a sudden thing about the importance of academic rigor. Now, remember that when academic rigor has been applied to race science, right? We've been told that doesn't matter. You have the right to articulate eugenics as a legitimate point of view. You have the right to articulate fear as a worth debate. But when it comes to the life of Winston Churchill, then some kind of abstract notion of academic rigor is suddenly put into motion. And that simply means you can't talk about racism or the British Empire in relation to Winston Churchill, and you can't talk about Nazism in relation to the British Empire. That is completely off the agenda. Controversial or not, that is off the agenda. So what is also interesting, alongside the suddenly discover that no, not all controversial ideas can be discussed on campus. We are also told what we've been saying all along, that academic standards, that academic freedom goes hand in hand with academic standards. And all of a sudden, we had people who don't normally like academic standards suddenly claim that the Nazism of Winston Churchill lacked expertise and lacked rigor.
And again, I'm not sure on what basis and this was a group set up by the college. I mean, it wasn't some obscure group. I mean, it was you'd already done 2 out of 3 meetings as well, and so this was like an ongoing conversation. That
well, actually, what happened is that we were going to have a 3rd event, but by then, completely spooked by the tabloids and by policy exchange, the college decided that it had to have very, very tight control over who was invited and what would be discussed. So they didn't initially cancel it, but they decided that they would complete veto on who could speak and what they could speak about. And as it happens, students had proposed the well-known speaker, thinker, writer, Akala, and they wanted him to talk about commemoration, which had always been the theme for the last event. And if you do have him speak officially on the college's platform, and he can really only talk about education, but if you want him to talk about commemoration, then we cannot have him speak officially. So in one sense, Akala was cancelled, and then when the working group put its foot down and said, no, we will have Akala and we will have him talk about commemoration and the British Empire, the college said a bunch of contradictories. First said, well, you guys did yours, which is absurd. That never happened. Then it said, no, actually, your time ran out. You were never supposed to function past May. And as of this moment, it's unclear exactly what happened, but I'm very clear that the college disbanded the working members of the group have issued a statement pointing this out.
And so I suppose this is getting into a wider kind of question I have regarding, because Cambridge kind of puts itself up as this kind of beacon for free speech or setting the precedent. Like they had the thing, like, aren't they supposed to, is it tolerate but not respect? Like, there was that whole debate over whether you respect or so they say you don't have to respect every view, which you're not claiming that you had to, for example, agree that Nazis and British Empire are the equivalent, but you can make that argument and you can tolerate the argument and hear it and then make an assessment. I mean, that seems to me like the whole premise of free speech and academic freedom. And yet, I don't have the sense that Cambridge University has been involved other than to do nothing, I suppose. It's maybe it's a college matter or just stay out of it. And yet, they're so prominent in saying they're the leading free speech university, I suppose.
What's interesting, and here I will mention somebody you mentioned a few minutes ago when you were talking about was whatever battle of ideas, and you mentioned Arif Ahmed, who is Arif Ahmed MBE, who has been rewarded for his services apparently to free speech. He's a member of the Free Speech Union. He is a member of the university. And he's the one who changed the university's policy from respect to tolerate. Weirdly, I've not heard a single word from him about this cancellation or about the manifest dangers that this kind of cancellations generate on campuses. So what here is that the so-called Free Speech Union, who also had nothing to say about what happened, they're not interested in free speech. We knew that. They're not interested in academic freedom. We knew that. They're interested in the perpetuation of particular racist, sexist, and retrograde points of view, and they will come to defend those. But forms of free speech which might be shown, but don't play into racist, imperialist narratives, well, that's not protected, and that's very clear.
Yeah, definitely. And so it seems like, I guess, what I'm sort of thinking about in relation to some of these issues is on, I guess, what can anyone do? Like, so here's a better way of thinking about this. It strikes me as this example is not the only one that suggests to me that actually having a critical relationship to your subjects, critical race theory would obviously be another huge one, actually does require some vigorous defense of freedom of speech, academic freedom, that we do actually need to defend our rights to say critical things, to things that are unpopular, which is exactly what these kind of right-wing folks are saying, the left or the woke or whatever are the ones who are against that. But in fact, it strikes me as does the left or the woke side of the argument actually need to articulate an academic freedom position? Because it strikes me as no one at least here is against academic freedom or free speech in that sense. What do we think?
You know, I do think we need to do that. And I think there are some very brilliant people who've been writing about these issues. Gavin particularly comes to mind. David Renton comes to mind. To just mention two people who've written books very, very recently. David Renton has made the point that we need to think very carefully about strategies like no platforming, and we need to articulate. And his point is really key, which is that historically, it is the left which has fought for free speech. If we have free speech today, it is because of struggles from the left and from below. And one of the successes of the right is that it has hijacked free speech and academic. Its issue are never the issues of the right. The right has always been essentially McCarthy, right? It is the left which has had to struggle for the right to articulate dissent, to the right to challenge censorship, the right to articulate what was, outlawed as sedition. And I think we need to reclaim that ground, and we need to reclaim it on the one hand, actively saying, well, we have the right to articulate dissenting views. But I think I do agree with David that we need to come up with a careful assessment of how we use anti-fascist tactics like no platforming, which absolutely has its place, but it needs to be wielded strategically and carefully, as Evan Smith, who is another very interesting scholar writing on free speech, has pointed out.
Yes, and we had Evan on the program maybe a month ago or so, which was, we were pleased because he was in Australia. I couldn't stay awake that long, but yeah, it seems like I guess there's a sense in which folks seem to be becoming aware of, if nothing else, just how phony the culture wars are, and the way in which the right are very obviously sort of manipulating things. There was a report, I think it was earlier today. Let's see if I can find it. There was a report earlier today about from even the Fabian Society is sort of saying we have to end the culture wars, but you don't do that by, let's see if I can find this. Fabian Society says recent fight don't reflect genuine divisions. They're talking about the introduction of what's his name, Frank Luntz from America. You've got people like Eric Kaufman, I feel like, telling people that if someone doesn't want to date someone, that they're totalitarian. But yeah, because we've talked about this in the past, that it seems like the sort of center left has had a difficulty engaging with this. I think because they're so keen to do the both sides thing and sort of say, well, there's intolerance on both sides. But I on the one hand, I think things like the English football, the way that was managed in the past few weeks, seems like really opportunistic on the one side from the conservative government, and then on the other side, sort of saying anyone who tries to make this too woke is politicizing football, and you're not allowed to take a knee, and so on. But this is Andrew Harrop from the Fabian Society saying it will not be easy to end the culture wars. The fake controversies create division between people who don't share the libertarian worldview, and that the way to deal with this is not on winning the culture wars, but on calling them out. So I suppose that's maybe the question. Is that a good strategy? What do we think about the center left starting to kind of articulate some position? Some guy, we talked about this, I feel like recently, you had some things to say about what Keith's view of this is.
I'm afraid I didn't really understand what that sentence meant. Like, not concentrating on not winning the cultural wars, but on calling them out. Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that what we're doing on our sort of fortnightly program is calling it out. But I wouldn't suggest that's like a winning strategy. I just feel like it's making us feel sane to share with other people how absurd we think some of this stuff is. But do we think that's enough?
I think.
Well, yeah, sorry, go on, Joe.
No, sorry. I think it's kind of a typical centrist fence-sitting position, actually, from the Fabian Society. Because here's what they're saying. It's not that we need to sort of show that fascist ideas and racism and transphobia are bad. That's not the goal here. The goal is just to point out that this is a manufactured culture war. And so I'm kind of reading it, maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick, but I'm reading it as quite a sort of fence-sitting position to take, which I think Starmer has done on things like trans rights too. So that would sort of go along with that sort of centrist, centre-left, centre whatever.
Yeah, because it seems like Keir's trying to do his, like, we can be patriotic and, like, wrap ourselves in the flag and army as well. And but that's because they've done some polling in these, like, left behind places, and those places seem to, I don't know, like, British values or whatever, which is, I mean, that is just objectively kind of some coded language for whiteness, is it not? I mean, I don't see why not acknowledging that gets anyone anywhere. Because surely those voters that feel that way are not going to be voting Labour anyway, are they?
It also, I mean, I was actually going to echo Joe and add that, I mean, it also seems to be a position that comes from comes from a place of privilege that like none of the, if none of the trans stuff, if none of the race stuff personally affects you, then of course you can afford to have that kind of, let's not fight this, let's just call it out, whatever that means. Not engage with the content of the argument and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there are literally people whose lives kind of depend on getting the argument right, and making sure that the disinformation stops if they are trans people, if they are black people, people of color, etc. So it just seems like a really weird position to take.
I mean, they're not debating in the MCR at Magdalen College over port after dinner, are they? This is people's, as you say, people's actual lives are affected. So I think you're bang on. It's kind of a sort of let's take an intellectual kind of position on this rather than like, no, there are fascists coming. Like, we need to counteract that. So I'd agree with you, definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's a question. I mean, as someone kind of following this regularly, I mean, I'm not a particular fan of any type of patriotism, but I thought that there was some hope in the sense of Gareth Southgate talking about some type of an inclusive idea of England as being some basis upon which you could start to build something that wasn't what the St. George's flag currently represents. Because at some point that sort of circuit needs to be disrupted in some way, if everyone's going to continue to live in England and not either feel completely left out or feel like they're the only ones who deserve to be included. And yet at the same time, it's kind of like we do need to start to call this out. I feel like there's a lot of people like this calling people out. There's plenty of people today saying that they can't stand the racism being directed at the players. But as you said, it's like, are there fascists on the march and so forth? I mean, I don't know if they're. I don't know if it's not like there's Oswald Mosley on the street, but it seems like they're farther than they've been for quite a long time, and there's this seriously well coordinated international movement to stoke these culture wars. I feel like unless you have a countervailing force, this isn't going to end.
Well, and I think, coming back to the Churchill College story, I mean, specifically in the context of UK higher education, I think our institutions and our structures are pretty much uniquely defenseless and useless against this sort of thing. I mean, you think of Churchill College, you think of also Oriel College, Oxford. Like, if you're counting on your vice chancellor or your master or, whatever to defend your academic freedom and your freedom of speech, you're not going to get anywhere because, I mean, as far as I can tell, they're only really beholden to seemingly a bunch of donors, a bunch of famous and wealthy alumni, and the tabloids. And otherwise, they don't really care that much, which then I guess leads to the question of what you can do about it. And I think, as always, it seems like the only thing that we can do as quote unquote ordinary members of staff is, grassroots organization from the bottom up, and also try to if possible, get into some of these structures, whether it's through University Senate or through that sort of thing. And because otherwise, it's just going to be like this thing is not going to stop. It's just going to be carry on and on and on and on. And the so-called university managers and the leaders, they are incapable of doing anything about it because they're either scared of the government or they're looking at the bottom line and they're scared of wealthy donors, or they're just scared of what's going to happen, what's going to show up on the following day in the pages of the Daily Mail. And I think the I mean, sort of tangentially related, coming back to the football, and I think again in the football, in the performance of England national team and all of that we've seen the past month, I mean, there is a sort of kernel progressivism there. I wouldn't call it patriotism. I would call it maybe some kind of community building, because football at its best is about building communities. It's about helping people from vulnerable backgrounds, from disadvantaged backgrounds, to get involved in sport. And there is a kernel, there's a possibility of producing some sort of community, producing some sort of unity there that actually is probably quite threatening to the kind of nationalism and the kind of patriotism that our politicians and our government want to impose on us. And I think because the England national team has that kind of kernel possibility, and they also haven't been shy about things like Black Lives Matter, or in the case of Marcus Rashford, about free school meals for children, etc., etc. That's why Boris Johnson and Priti Patel had to, at the start anyway, try to shut them down, right? And then only when they started to do a little bit better, then they decided to jump on the bandwagon. And then as soon as the three black kids basically in the England national team missed their penalties, then it's back to the racism again, right?
Yeah. Well, it's as you said, it's quite complicated, and I'm not sure. I know Priya, you mentioned that you might have to set off a bit before too, but so just in case you do have to go, I just did want to say thank you so much for joining us and filling us in on what's going on in Churchill. I think we'll stay on the line, and I want to read everyone Gavin Williamson's speech to see how close it fits Churchill. But thank you so much, Priya, for joining us. So that was really interesting to see. What's going on, and this is Gavin. And I just wanted to compare Priya's experience at Churchill to what Gavin had to say, because I didn't know this, but yesterday, I mean, when everyone's focused on the football, they've done the second reading of the HE bill. So that's now going through. And here we are. Imagine a world in which Gladstone had been cancelled. I mean, I feel like Gladstone was cancelled a few times. Didn't he lose election like 2 or 3 times? And he's one of those ones with the dates, like 4 separate dates that he had to come in and out of office.
Not unlike Churchill, actually.
Exactly.
Isn't it also true, by the way, that according to what's his face from Kent? Suddenly forgotten. Popoff from Kent.
Goodwin.
Steve Fielding. No.
Because according to Matthew Goodwin, right, like for every portrait in the average working class home or something, there are 10 Gladstone portraits. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure, if that is true. I mean, Matthew Goodwin has said it, so it must be true.
Oh, yeah.
Then, if all of our houses are surrounded by or filled with Gladstone, then how can it possibly be cancelled?
Yeah, I mean, Gladstone. And then also, this is another one that I quite like in his speech. Well, imagine a world in which Darwin had been prevented from putting forward his transformational ideas on evolution. It's like, do you know anything about the history of Darwin reception? Like, I mean, Descent of Man, didn't come out. Did it come out after his life because he couldn't publish it? I mean, I don't have to imagine the world. 19th century Britain was a world in which Darwin was preventing from putting forward all of his ideas, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know about some guy, but as a historian of science, I'm just glad not to see Galileo. The Catholic Church cancelling Galileo, which is not what happened.
I mean, imagine a world in which Darwin had been prevented to put forward his transformation ideas of evolution. What, literally the Church of England?
I know. It's like the Snopes trial, or in America, it's like there were states trying to prevent the study of evolution. It's like, it's no different than, and it's probably more or less the exact same equivalent as the populists who are trying to ban critical race theory right now without actually knowing what they're talking about.
But isn't this just a massive straw man? Like, no one has said that we're going to stop teaching people about Newton or Darwin, or isn't this just bollocks? Like, where has this come from?
I mean, if anything, it's Michael Gove and Gavin Williamson. They have put together, imposed this really crappy national curriculum in history, which means that, people like Darwin and Newton don't actually make an appearance in GCSE and A-level history. Other than, maybe like the briefest of mentions or something. And, you probably have to like go to a private school or something to get some of these topics. Otherwise, it's just war-to-war, First and Second World War and the Tudors, right? So if anything, yeah, I can imagine a world in which, all of these people aren't taught in schools, and that's kind of right now, thanks to the Conservative government.
So who has cancelled Newton and Darwin then? Michael Gove? I mean...
Well, no, I think he's trying to say, like, it's basically the Galileo point. It's like, imagine what would have happened if Darwin wasn't allowed to speak because people didn't like what he had to say. And it's kind of
but
like...
a lot of the time he was prevented from...
I know, it's
it's
like...
it's so controversial. Like, what do they think Darwin's life was like? Do they think it was all flipping plain sailing?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. And then he's saying, I want all universities to be places where free speech is not just tolerated, but is celebrated and thrives. And again, I'm just thinking of Churchill College, Cambridge, which, this tolerated business, like, they've made such a big deal of this distinction between toleration and respect. And then this is a bit that I really don't understand. I welcome... I'm going to have to read this word for word. And I welcome that so many in our universities have stood up to defy the intolerant minority who wish to enforce a monoculture of ideas. How can a minority enforce a monoculture? Like... I just don't understand. Like, there's a small group of people who want to enforce...
To be fair, transphobes are kind of managing that, trying to do that at the moment.
They are an intolerant minority.
It's actually, here it's pretty much a self-portrait, isn't it? Like, Gavin Williamson and Michael Gove, etc., are the intolerant minority who wish to enforce a conservative monoculture of ideas in university campuses, right?
Yeah, and I think to come back to that celebrated rather than tolerated point, we're back to having sex with Eric Kaufman and Trump supporters, aren't we? That's basically what we're saying, though. It's like you have to enthusiastically
clap hands,
have sex. Like, is that not all the same thing? Like, you have to sit there and have lunch with someone and go, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're racist. I love hearing all of your racist views while I'm trying to quietly eat my lasagna." It's like, no. Just no.
And we should not demonize those who disagree with us. It's like, what about woke? There's this idea of this cancel culture that it's like all that we're doing is disagreeing, rather civilly, I would add, as well. It's like...
yes, civilly, tone policing.
Yeah, but, as Priya said, it's like there were 4 people ready to make academic papers. It's like, it's not like the equivalent of what the English fans were doing at the stadium last night. Some of those videos of... and yet we're not allowed to say, like, there is some troubling aspects of English fandom that are covered for, far right racism, and that it's a good thing that that the team themselves are trying to push back against this, that the FA is trying to push back against this, that it's a good thing for football to want to eliminate racism. from sport and society. That's like a good thing. Just like it's a good thing for universities to want to do that. It's like a good thing that universities want to be inclusive of transgender people, so that our colleagues and friends and students can feel like they're allowed to be in those spaces they've been excluded from. But how is making that argument the divisive argument? I feel like that's really, or how is that being demonizing or disagreeing uncivilly or what have you? I mean,
it reminds me of what Sunday Blake, who came on a couple of weeks ago onto the show, said about, like some of the stuff that she had to deal with, like, somebody coming to a speaker coming to campus and like shouting the word penis repeatedly at trans people. And so, this is what the bill from Gavin Williamson and others is designed to protect. It's designed to protect the people who will come onto campus and shout penis at trans people or racial slurs at people of color, right? So, like, it's defending their right to free speech. And if you want to challenge these people who shout penis or use racial slurs, then you are the intolerant and divisive one.
Well, and because that's exactly what they did at this Spa. It was just someone who they since found out there was no transgender person present, and there was just a video of some woman running around shouting that there was someone with a penis. And then the people were like, "Can you leave?" They were basically like, "Ma'am, this is a Wendy's. Can you like, please leave?" But yet it picked up as this kind of, Gary Linehan and everybody said that this was horrible. You've got Tucker Carlson and the right wing were saying this is going on until you have these protests, and then people get literally whipped up in a frenzy and stab each other.
We Spa or Y Spa is a notoriously well-known inclusive spa where people are often they are trans-friendly, right? So it's almost like if you didn't want to kind of come across a transgender person,
why would you
then
go
you
there?
just would not go there. So yeah, it does all feel hugely manufactured.
I mean, I don't want to... Sorry,
go ahead. No, it's fine.
I was going to say, I think like the ridiculousness of this particular story makes me kind of want to put my tinfoil hat on a little bit and suggest that this is probably, a bunch of far-right organizations kind of testing the waters, like basically seeing how much this information could potentially translate into physical violence. And in this case, they might say, oh, wow, okay, so actually this is how far things could go if we like adopt particular strategies and set certain things and allow them to circulate in particular circles. And this is what we could actually achieve. So I think for them, it was probably like an experiment just to see what could unfold, right?
Yeah. Well, just to go back, because I found this image quite typical of Andy No preparing for his Antifa rally, where it's kind of like, okay, so this is a manufactured crisis, but it's like, you can't just say it's manufactured, you also have to say there's no such thing as these monsters. Like, there's not enough people doing the both sides thing saying there's no such thing as all of these, like, transgender criminals that you're so worried about and saying are making everyone unsafe. It's like there needs to be a much more full-throated... It can't just be like, we're not going to say anything against the gender-critical people, but we are going to say that we love pride and leave it at that. It's like you can't do both of those things. You have to say these gender critical folks, these critical race theory folks, they're doing this kind of performance. They're creating these scenarios in which they get canceled, and even if they by accident get supposedly canceled, it's like they still figure out ways of turning themselves into the victims, and everybody ends up feeling sorry for them and so on. It's like,
well, they had to stab themselves at Spa, right? I mean, far be it for me to sort of, but it is a little bit galling, isn't it? Also, isn't Andy No the one that the banjo player from Mumford & Sons tweeted in support of, and then ended up leaving the band, and is now on that kind of freeze peach wagon with right. Jessica DeWalls and
I forgot that in the news rundown.
Other people who have really not been cancelled because they wouldn't stock her postcards in the shop or something. Apparently, that's not their freedom of choice. But anyway, I just thought that was quite an interesting link with Paul.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I forgot about Mumford & Sons because that's also a part of the.
Imagine being too right wing for Mumford & Sons. I mean, his dad's like a huge billionaire.
Yeah. I don't know. There's certainly some money to be made on the grift circuit, but I don't know. Maybe you would think that Mumford & Sons can get paid. A bit like J.K. Rowling. Surely, isn't it more?
I don't think he needs a job. Put it that way. I think he's kind of set up probably.
Yeah.
After his dad.
Well, but I was just trying to track down because he's on some panels. I think. Let me see if I can find it. Because he was on some panels now. He's making the circuit with people talking about the metropolitan elites and so on.
Well, so I think, there are essentially two crowds, right? I think there is the crowd like J.K. Rowling, like this guy from Mumford & Sons, whose name I can't even remember or care. I mean...
He's called Winston. He's called Winston.
That's right. Yes, you're right.
And then there's Lawrence Fox, etc. As people who are actually independently wealthy, and so they're just basically doing this for the attention. Then there's a different crowd, right? So there's Darren Grimes, like for instance, who literally lives in his mom's basement. That crowd is trying to make money out of this. So you get the sort of, the attention seekers and the grifters, and there's a sort of little bit of nuance. So you have to sort of separate these two groups of people, right?
Yeah, but surely these are the intolerant minority. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I feel like actually the majority is relatively tolerant of a variety of different positions. I mean, say what you will about how vigorously they defend, folks who are getting stomped on. The centrists have some work to do in that area, but I feel like, most people are like, yeah, freedom of speech is good. That's why we have it. Academic freedom is good. That's why we support it. But then it's kind of like, why does everyone seem to buy this idea that academics are, and that there's this woke intolerance in this way? Like, isn't it just the case that maybe people are decent because they don't like to be bigots and don't like people to loudly shout penis at one another at public events? It's like, why is that considered an unusual intolerant behavior to be like, hey, racist, can you get the heck out of here? I don't want to talk to you anymore. Or just go onto a hole because you're an intolerant minority that we don't actually want people to feel like this is acceptable. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the majority of people don't like having. I mean, I think with the word penis, it's kind of depends on context, But no, if you're shouting penis at a transgender woman, that is horrible. But obviously, it's not really what we do, is it? We don't go around shouting out slurs in an adult society. We don't go around shouting these words out. I think most people would not want to have to hear that. And I see no problem with keeping Darren Grimes in his mum's basement, if I'm honest. If we're talking about, putting trolls back in their boxes. I mean, just, I don't know. I think the idea that we give equal weight to all these views because of free speech is that very centrist idea, isn't it? And where does that stop? If you allow that, then where does it stop? Do you say, oh, well, Holocaust, we've got to weigh it up, guys. We've got to do the balance sheet. We've got to, I mean, where does it end? If we allow this.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the tension is that on the one hand, they want to defend a principle of, in the abstract, we should all support a free speech situation. And sometimes that means policing the situation so that you allow unpopular views to be heard, right? So I can understand that, like, you would need some kind of, like, system of ensuring that unpopular views were heard, whether that means having security at an event or whatever to make sure the speaker could finish what they had to say. And so I can understand that, and I can understand that being the centrist position. Then there's another question of, like, the far right saying we're going to exploit that to platform our hateful things as much as possible. And then whenever anyone is like, hey, can you stop? We just shout, oh, free speech, right? So that's two separate things, both of which are reinforcing the idea. But this is the thing I do not understand. Why are the centrists not defending Priya and the left-wing people and critical race theory and the sort of left-wing unpopular ideas from being heard? Like, I don't understand. If someone genuinely wants the abstract principle of free speech, why would you not defend the left wing as well as the right wing? I mean, the obvious answer is they don't actually like the left wing, but
or they're lazy, and it involves actually putting your oar in, and doing that, And I think people want a quiet life, and they don't want to upset, I don't know, Nicholas Soames. I don't know. Well, I would just rename the college if I was them. Just rename it. Say, fine, we're gonna call it something else. We'll get sponsored by Churchill, the Nodding Dog Company, right? That's what they should do. And then it's still Churchill College, and they've got all that money from the Nodding Dog people.
Well, I think Joe, actually, you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, like Nicholas Soames, like basically centrists are, at least as far as I can tell, interested in defending, abstract notions of freedom of speech or academic freedom or whatever, if it allows them to ingratiate or at least not annoy incredibly powerful people in society, like Nicholas Soames. I mean, frankly, defending somebody like Priya Gopal in this particular episode, I mean, they're probably thinking, what's in it for me? Like, what am I going to get out of this? I'm going to piss off Nicholas. I'm going to piss off Churchill College. Why would I want to do that? Like, why would I want to stick my neck out for this person and sabotage my whatever academic career and blah, blah, blah doing that?
And Soames is their hero because he's one of the decent Tories who didn't want Brexit or who was kind of had the whip removed from him. Decent Tories. FBPE are very keen on these decent Tories like Soames as well.
Anna Soubry and so on. But, so, I mean, but why did they make the effort for, like, Katie Hopkins and people like that? Because couldn't you make the same argument? It's like, why should a vice chancellor stick their neck out to make sure that some, racist can be platformed on campus? I mean, I guess it's just because there are people in the right wing demanding that these people get platformed.
I don't know what Leon thinks, but I wonder if this is a typical situation where it's useful for a college to have a lot of power as opposed to a university. Because I think Cambridge and Oxford are quite good at saying, oh, it's a college matter. And then there's this kind of level of obfuscation as to who can do what. And, you know, I don't know what the situation was in terms of how the decision was made to disband this group. But I don't know whether it would be different if this was happening at, say, Manchester Uni, right? Because of the way colleges are. I don't know if Leon has any thoughts on that particular oddity of the Oxbridge.
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I think if this were an episode happening in University of Manchester, for instance, like, do you think really like Nancy Rockwell, of all people, like,
I didn't mean to
the Daily Mail?
I didn't mean to like quote my own current employer, but only for the next month and a half.
Well, but really, any Russell group is going to be in the same situation, but they're going to have one. So, for example, I've followed a lot about University of Manchester's academic freedom, and they're pretty good at it. Like, they say that you could criticize the university and all sorts of things that other universities don't always say. Is they don't sort of put that in writing that you're allowed to criticize the university, which I'm actually personally had to, make sure that was the case. But if you take any Russell Group university, what they'll tend to do is they'll say any academic is allowed to make political positions, but the university as an institution won't take any political positions. And then this gets back to the question of what is considered political. And I feel like Priya's work is always going to be considered political. It's a bit like everybody saying taking the knee is political. It's like, how is that political? It's just anti-discrimination. And it's not saying Labour Party should win. It's not saying anything other than we stand against racial discrimination. And in this instance, both England and Italy took the knee.
Is it a bit like you're so vain, I bet you think this song is about you? It's like, well, if you don't think you're racist, why are you bothered about people taking the knee? What does that only threatens you if like
you want to be racist,
if you think you might be racist, right? Like, it's a subtweet and you think the subtweet's about you. Well, it kind of is then, isn't it? If you're not, why would you claim to be, on the one hand, that that on the one hand there's a Sewell report which apparently says that systemic racism doesn't exist in our society, that this is kind of an individual problem. So it's not political, but then turn around and say that taking the knee is political somehow. Like, I kind of, there's a lot of very long stretches being done here, I think, in terms of how they're trying to frame it.
So just something, and I think that actually is, now that we've discussed it, I'm thinking maybe that's something to think about moving forward, is kind of, okay, let's say that the Fabian Society is stirring to start to think about, they're at least going to call out that these culture wars are fabricated. That there are people like Frank Luntz, Policy Exchange, are like manufacturing these crises, and we should not necessarily respond to them, but respond and say, this is made up. Now, all of us agreed that's probably not far enough, but let's build on what they're suggesting. And I think that we can say, which side is actually for free speech, which is the more liberal side. And, the left wing already has to deal with the right wing saying stuff in the newspapers all the time. It's not like we are unaware of what these right wing positions are. It's a bit like the Journal of Controversial Ideas. It's like you went to all this trouble to create the journal, and then you just posted some stuff that it's like there have been 100 Medium posts on like why blackface is legitimate. It's like you haven't actually said anything that controversial, in fact. And so I wonder if that's actually like almost a kind of rhetorical battle ground is to define what is considered political and what is considered controversial, or and to say, actually, you guys need to start defending Priya, you need to start defending Lester, critical management studies. Like, you need to put your money where your mouth is. That's also, Eric Hoffman just wants to get laid, apparently. That's made up. But actually, there are some real things that you should defend: free speech and academic freedom, and sort of
and also, what about the freedom of transgender and racialized people to have a nice experience on campus, right? Yeah. Why aren't you defending that? It's like interesting, isn't it? Who they'll stick up for and who they'll come out to bat for, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I've already kept you guys way over. Thank you so much. I thought that was really great. It was really a pleasure to have Priya on. I think in 2 weeks' time, we've got a very special guest in keeping with our... And I think this person is going to invite a living person to debate them. And so we'll see who that is. We'll make an announcement very soon about that. Otherwise, thank you, some guy. Thank you, Woke Sorcerer.
Thank you for having me, for platforming me, as always.
As always.
Are we allowed to sort of say who those people may be?
Well, we might be. Okay, let's give a teaser, right? Yeah. So I'm pretty sure Ted McCormick from Canada is going to be coming.
He's my favorite person on Twitter, so I'm really excited.
And the real question remaining is who does he consider his nemesis, and who does he want to debate? And right now, I think it's between James Lindsay and Steven Pinker.
Yep.
So maybe even both. I bet he could take them both on, to be honest.
Yeah, he regularly does. All day. I don't know how he gets any work done. He's just constantly he's constantly just shit posting about these people. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to ask Steven Pinker questions about Epstein or not?
Well, I would venture to guess that he would cancel himself immediately.
But that's Leon,
from that conversation.
Free speech. We're allowed to say whatever we like, aren't we?
Right.
Yeah, just asking a friendly.
I mean, I wanted to ask him some questions about his terrible scholarship. Not really sure. We need to go into Epstein, unless we're planning to make this like the second Mateless interview of Prince Andrew or whatever. I'm heading for lawyers' letters now. If I say any more, aren't I?
Right.
But yeah,
well,
it's going to be fun.
It's going to be great.
26th.
We'll have some more info. We'll have some clear, who's going to join us in the ring. I think it'll be a bit more of a wrestling ring next time.
What you mean is, who are we going to invite? Who is going to ignore the invitation, though?
Who's going to ignore the invitation next time?
We should do the Wall of Fame, Wall of Shame.
Well, yes, I'll add Winston Churchill to the list.
Yeah. Very rude. Very rude. Not impressed.
Indeed. But yeah, thank you both for a wonderful discussion, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Huh? Free speech.